Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om peace, peace, peace. And good evening. We are reading the Pastoral Sri Krishna, which is an article by Swami Ramakrishnananda, one of the direct disciples of Ramakrishna. We're right in the middle of a big paragraph, but just to summarize a bit of what's been happening here, you will remember that Devaki, the mother of Sri Krishna, and her husband Vasudeva were imprisoned by Devaki's brother, Kamsa, because he had had a foretelling that he would be killed by her 8th issue. So, just to be sure, he kills all of her issues. This is somewhat reminiscent of King Herod killing all the children under 2, just to be on the safe side, you could say, to try to get rid of the predicted killer of him, or he thought he would be the next king, so that's why he wanted to get rid of Jesus. Now, symbolically, we can think of Devaki as being our embodiment in a physical being, and so just as she is imprisoned by the evil Kamsa, we are imprisoned in the body, and we are prevented from seeing our true nature, just as she is prevented from expressing her true nature in the world because of the ego. So Kamsa then would symbolize our ego. Now, in the story, we remember that when Krishna is finally born, miraculously the guards all fall asleep. This would be symbolic of the sense organs falling asleep. If we want to know our true selves, we have to tell our sense organs to stop going out and perceiving things in the world. So similarly, in order to free the baby Krishna, which represents joy and bliss, the guards had to be put to sleep. So they were all asleep, just like our sense organs need to be shut up, you could say, in order for us to experience the inner bliss and joy. So then we saw a couple of incidences where Sri Krishna, even as a very young baby, was able to defeat demons that were sent by King Kamsa. So the ego tends to want to keep things in its control. It wants to make sure that you as an organism survive, and so it doesn't want you to understand that you're already immortal and you don't need the ego to keep you alive. You're already infinitely immortal. But it doesn't want you to know that, so it keeps distracting you and trying to kill any bliss and joy that you might want to experience from within. So the first one was a goddess Putana who disguises herself as this lovely motherly figure who's going to nourish you. Well, this is somewhat like what the world does to us. We think we're going to be nourished by the world, by all the little trinkets and toys and joys that the world dangles out in front of us that we think are going to be fulfilling, just as a baby might think that this nursery maid might have very nourishing milk. But of course, her milk is poisonous, just like most of the things in the world are just simply distractions to us, and they prevent us from realizing our true nature. So the bliss and joy embodied in Krishna and the infinite goodness embodied by the baby Krishna is able to see through this and suck the life out of these worldly enjoyments. Then there's another demon who comes in disguise of a cart, and the heavy cart is supposed to crush the little baby Krishna. And then this would be like worldly duties that always feel like they're crushing us. But this fails to kill the baby Krishna as well. And so similarly, there are many stories about how Krishna saves himself from many demons that the ego, represented by Kamsa, sends its way. All right, so we were in the middle of this big, long paragraph, which was really getting to the point that these are very miraculous sounding stories, and how do you fit that into a scientific outlook? And we pointed out that in quantum mechanics, there's room for the unexpected, that everything is probabilistic, and there's always a very tiny possibility of things happening in very unexpected ways. Also, we have to remember that this is a common problem for many religions that try to see things historically. So if you're very attached to thinking of all of the Puranic stories as being actually historical, there might be some problems for you. I mean, the Christians, for example, have the same problem. If you look at the Bible, you can go on the internet and find places that point out 700 inconsistencies in the Bible. This is because eyewitnesses don't always agree. Also storytellers tend to like to elaborate their stories. And then people like to mythologize the truth of history in order to make stories more memorable and more of a teaching tool. You can get a hint as to the process when you look at what's happened to St. Nicholas and Santa Claus. There's a thread of truth about St. Nicholas that creeps into the stories of Santa Claus, but they're highly mythologized in order to appeal to children. And and of course, we also have many psychological studies that show that eyewitnesses are not very accurate, that they often see things from their own perspective and put their own spin on things, especially if any length of time passes. And we've got a few millennia here going in order to have things changed over the centuries. So you can't expect all the details to be exactly historically accurate. And so that's also possible. Now, does it matter? I don't think so. Christianity certainly managed to produce many, many saints in spite of 700 inconsistencies in the Bible. It didn't seem to bother them. And we have the same thing in Hinduism. We have many, many saintly people arising out of all of the different traditions in Hinduism, whether it's Vaishnavism, Shaktism, or Shaivism, or whatever other ism you might find in Hinduism. And so the fact that some of the details might not be historically accurate really is not of a major concern. We need to look at the symbolic significance of the incidences and what they teach us, not whether it's accurate in every detail or not. So Atma's going to start back a few sentences before where we ended, because this particular paragraph went on for more than 3 pages. So Atma's going to start back a little ways. Let's go ahead and read.
As in a living being, life depends for its existence upon the soul, that is, with the entrance or exit of the soul in the organism, life also will have to enter into or go away from it. Similarly, the cosmic life must depend for its existence upon a soul behind, but for which no life can exist. This is our honest conviction. This was also the conviction in those old and hoary Puranic days, when people were holistic believers in a universal soul, whom they called God. This God used to peep out to them through all glorious phenomena, through all beautiful and charming manifestations of nature. Hence the sun, the moon, the lightning and thunder, the fire, the sublime mountains like the Himalayas, the wide and long winding rivers with pure and limpid water like the Ganga, the gigantic trees which lift up their innumerable massive and leafing branches to reach the heavens. Like peepal trees, the majestic king sitting upon his brilliant throne, the glorious sages sitting above kings, potentates, and emperors, upon their thrones of eternal peace and bliss, placed upon the abiding rock of truth in whatever is great, glorious, good, and extraordinary, were to them the manifestations of the divine soul behind the universe.
Wow, that's quite a sentence. How long did that go on? So basically the idea is that the divine consciousness permeates everything. And so with proper eyes, we can train ourselves to see the divine consciousness in everything, whether it's the sun, the moon, the heavens, the stars, the trees, the rivers. All of these things are embodied with consciousness, and they can be personified as such. All right, let's go ahead.
So the divine soul behind the universe, as every limb of the living man is filled with the man, similarly, every important and impressive phenomena in nature was filled with that divinity in their eyes. That being the case, is it not natural that the innocent and pure-hearted people of the period, and especially the inhabitants of Gokula, before whose eyes these incidents took place, should not look upon these extraordinary disasters in the early life of our hero as mere accidents which he accidentally escaped, but as the workings of some superhuman evil powers which he was able to put down with his own superhuman divine power. The modern critics may pity the innocent convictions of the people of those old days, but if we compare the old with the modern views, we can in no way envy the knowledge and improvement which natural philosophy has given to our modern civilized men and women. It has taken away much of the poetry from our hearts and has thrown us into a dull, dead, and inert world where a small amount of precarious and transient sensual enjoyment is the only charm for us. By trying to take away our God from us, it's also trying to deprive us of an all-loving, all-protecting, all-gracious, and all-good Father, Mother, Master, or friend, and throw us upon the mercy of unflinching, changeless, heartless, and soulless laws of actions. If modern progress and civilization can give us nothing better than this, can we rightly feel any pride by imagining that we are happier and better than the innocent people of those ancient days who always felt themselves protected and safe under the parental care of an all-merciful and all-loving power? If it is a fact that we create our own world so that a happy man lives in a happy world, a miserable man lives in a miserable world, the saint lives in a world of saints, and so forth, then undoubtedly the happy man of those good old days were living in a safer and happier world. Their world was a picture of their own bright hearts.
Of course, he was speaking over 100 years ago when the prevailing scientific view had become very mechanical. You know, in Newton's world, there was an absolute space with an absolute time, and things all worked according to these mathematical laws, which he had discovered. And so it was like a clockwork, and everything just kept on going according to the laws of physics. And there was this prevailing belief that if you knew exactly where every particle in the universe was going and what it was doing and where it was at any particular incident, you could trace the history of the world backwards and forwards infinitely and find out exactly what was going to happen. Now, of course, again, with quantum mechanics, we know that's not the case. And with things like chaos theory and so forth, we know that even changes in the third and fourth decimal place in your numbers will eventually cause large changes in what happens. And so it would be impossible to know exactly what's going to happen or what did happen in either the past or the future. So this is, he's arguing against that prevailing view at his time. Now, as we go on, it'll be interesting to see how some of these incidences compare to the standard analysis of mythological stories. Even though we may consider these based on history and perfectly true historically, they also could be looked at in the light of mythology. It's always possible, I think, that the divine allows the lives of the incarnations to be lived in a fashion that has mythological power. The power of myth is profound, and so it's not at all unlikely that avatars live lives in such a way that they illustrate basic principles. And a couple of basic principles we might consider here is one of the hero. And if you study mythology, the hero is often set with many challenges that they have to overcome. And so we certainly have already seen that in Sri Krishna's life. He's sent all these demons, which he has to overcome, which he does quite easily, of course. Another interesting character in mythologies is the trickster, which is usually kind of an enigmatic character that is neither thought of as good or bad, but as something of a doorway or a guide to the infinite. They're often the person or being that keeps you from getting to your goal, and you have to propitiate them in order to get there. And so, while Krishna doesn't completely fit into that category by any means, there are some elements of that in that he's this very young kid who kind of breaks rules, and that's what a trickster does. A trickster tends to not have to worry about social norms. And so we'll find stories about Sri Krishna where, for example, he steals butter and things that you wouldn't think of as being something that's you would want to teach your children. You don't want to teach your children that it's great to steal butter. So in that sense, Sri Krishna as a baby is illustrating some of these trickster qualities. But the interesting thing about tricksters is that they do represent that transition. And of course, avatars are exactly that. They are an embodiment which allows us to, from this side of Maya, get a glimpse of and eventually reach the other side of Maya. And so they are indeed gatekeepers to the infinite realm. All right, let's see what Swami Ramakrishnananda is going to say here. He's going to talk about the hero here. So
now to return to our hero. The commonest incidents of his early life being extraordinary, superhuman, was naturally looked upon by all the inhabitants of Gokula as some divine being. Many such incidents are described in full in the glowing chapters of Srimad Bhagavatam. I will content myself by merely mentioning them for the present, referring my indulgent audience to those chapters for more detailed information. Once upon a time, his mother wanted to examine his mouth to see whether he had swallowed some earth or not. And as soon as he opened it in obedience to his mother's behest, she saw the whole universe contained in his mouth. At one time, he was very naughty, so Yashoda wanted to bind him with a rope as a punishment. She exhausted all the ropes in the house, but her child could not be bound. At last, when he saw that his mother had become very much tired and exhausted, he allowed himself to be bound by her to a wooden mortar, and she went about her household affairs. As soon as his mother left him, he began to crawl in the compound with the mortar at his back. He went out of the gate to a place where there were two big trees growing side by side, so near each other that the gap between them could hardly give room for the baby to crawl through, while the mortar being too big, he had to give a hard pull to drag it after him. And this brought down both trees with a terrible crash, leaving him, however, unscathed. And out of them came two celestial beings who began to worship and praise the baby as God incarnate. Now, when he was a little bigger and could walk and run about freely, one day a woman came to sell some nice fruits. Our little hero wanted to have some fruits, so he brought from his home some paddy, much as he could be contained between his tiny palms, to purchase the fruits with. The woman was so impressed with the beautiful look of the child, as well as his sweet manners, that although the grains were no remuneration even for a single fruit, she accepted them and filled his two palms with the best fruits in her basket. The child ran away overjoyed with those fruits, but when the woman looked into her basket to adjust her fruits, to her great astonishment, she found that all those grains had been converted into precious gold and diamonds. All such incidents impressed the idea of the child's divinity upon the minds of the inhabitants of Gokula. But their natural affection towards him made them frequently forget his superhuman character and filled them with great terror as to the safety of that little wonderful soul from the incessant attacks of the demons sent by Kamsa. Thus frightened, Nanda, their chief, and Upananda, his brother, convened a meeting where they proposed to shift their habitations from Gokula to a more distant place called Sri Vrindavana on the Jamuna, which is most beautiful and attractive to look at, for nature had spared no pains to make it vie with heaven itself. And no sooner was this proposed than it was unanimously carried out by all. The next day, the shepherds of Gokula, with their families, children, cattle, and various furniture, headed by Nanda, left the place and went to Sri Vrindavan, the paradise on earth. Sri Krishna was 5 years of age at this time.
Now, of course, we can see a great deal of symbolism here as well. Of course, the avatar is the symbolic representation of the infinite. And so we see the macrocosm inside the microcosm of the avatar, just as when she looked inside his mouth, she could see the entire universe. So indeed, the avatar does encompass the entire universe. And of course, nothing can bind the infinite, but even though he's appearing as a little baby, there's still nothing that can really bind him. So these are some of the symbolic things that we can see in these incidences. And of course, now we're going to see that he's in a place that appears heavenly to people. And so just as we think of God as being in a heavenly place, and that there are various lokas that are beautiful and filled with all sorts of wonderful things, we can see that Sri Krishna is going to live part of his life in one of these locations where everything has this rather heavenly nature to it. All right, let's continue.
Within a few days, the natural beauty of their new town was enhanced by the skillful hands of art. And houses, streets, and temples, as well as a large concourse of cowherds with their families and cattle, now gave life to the place which formerly had been the haunts of sweet-singing birds and roving beasts. There was a hill called Vandahana, very near it. Everything around was so beautiful to look at that Mother Nature seemed to have taken particular care to adorn and beautify it, to give a suitable reception to her Lord and Master, who was living in Nanda's house in the form of a baby. And so when the cowherds of Gokula shifted to Sri Vrindavan, all nature sang forth the sweetest praises to the Savior of the earth through the throats of her sweet singing and beautiful-looking birds. While her murmuring Jamuna, the whispering breeze, and blossom-laden trees, with their offerings of flowers, all unitedly worshipped and began to chant hymns softly in honor of the divine boy of Nanda. Within a very short time, they found the place perfectly comfortable and led the happiest of lives in that sweet Arcadia, like gods in heaven. Nanda's child went by the name of Sri Krishna, but his parents used to call him Gopala.
Now we're going to see again how there's going to be some symbolic truths that come out in this. Something that happens in many cultures as they shift from nature deities to a more personified human type of incarnation. The nature deities have to be put in their place, so to speak, so that the worship can then be focused on the avatar aspect. And so we're going to see that happen as well. So I don't know if he's going to get to that right away or if it's going to be a while, but let's go ahead.
He was very brisk in his early boyhood, yet sometimes naughty. He used to steal the butter intended for offering to God and eat it himself. He found a peculiar pleasure in teasing the shepherd girls, who sometimes used to come in a group to complain to his mother against him. But when the mother offered to chastise him, they would request her to forgive him that time. For although he used to tease them, they could not help loving him. He was so beautiful and charming. We've already seen how the seventh child of Devaki was transferred to the womb of Rohini, Vasudeva's first wife, and how on account of this, the child was known as Shankarchana. This child, too, was very fair and charming to look at, and for this reason, he was called Rama. Although Yashoda's son Sri Krishna was unruly and disobedient to others, he was fully obedient to Rama, his elder brother. Rama was more robust in constitution. He was very plain, simple, fearless, and bold, while Sri Krishna was more cunning and intelligent, and very delicate and fragile to all outward appearance, although in reality none was equal to him in strength, either of body or mind. He loved and honored his elder brother more than anyone here in this earth. These two boys, along with other shepherd boys of the same age, used to tend a number of calves in the neighboring pasture ground of Sri Vrindavan. They were the merriest group of little boys. The calves used to graze at the pasture, while they spent their time in playing, wrestling, hallowing, and merrymaking until they felt that they were hungry. Then they would lead their little drove to their homes, where their mothers had been anxiously waiting with food at hand, looking towards the past to see whether their darlings were coming or not. As soon as they saw their mothers, they would run towards them. Sometimes they used to narrate some terrible disasters that had befallen them in the pasture ground, as well as the narrow escape, which but for Rama and Krishna they could not have effected. For indeed, the wicked Kamsa used to send frequently one demon or another to kill Sri Krishna. These and other disguises were sure to be detected and put to death by him, or sometimes by his elder brother Rama. And when the mothers heard these incidents from their children, they used to clasp them in their bosoms, determining never to send them any more to the pasture ground, and thanking God for his kind care in protecting their helpless ones, little dreaming that so long as they were with Rama and Krishna, there could be no danger to them.
And of course, not to be confused with the Rama of an earlier incarnation of Vishnu. But anyway, this, again, that's alluding to many other incidences which apparently he's not going to mention, where Sri Krishna has to fight off various demonic things sent by the evil Kamsa. And so, again, we see that the people still have this natural tendency to think of them as helpless little infants or young kids, even though time and again they've proven that they are quite capable of handling all of the difficulties that come to them. So let's continue and see what other adventures our hero has in store.
The fond mother Yashoda, too, would never consent to send her child to the forest lands, which were beset with so many dangers for him. But as soon as the morning sun sent life and vigor into the limbs of these cherub-like shepherd boys, they could not bear the idea of remaining confined to their houses, and begged and importuned their mothers to send them to the pasture grounds with their calves, until the latter were prevailed upon to do so. The studied strategic approaches of the demons sent by Kamsa, which Rama and Krishna with their playmates had to encounter every now and then in the forests, we cannot honestly explain why, as mere accidents exaggerated into demon stories, without torturing the texts and hiding the plain and clear meanings behind the strained and far-fetched interpretations of some of our critics. Even such arbitrary explanations cannot throw any light on most of these incidents as we find them in the Puranas, and therefore these reckless critics have to take recourse to the theory of later additions and interpolations. Such guesswork can never give any satisfaction to a man even of an average understanding. So instead of teaching ourselves,
launching ourselves into
the shoreless sea as such baseless judgments, it's better to look at them as they are. Although they may appear in the present state of our knowledge to be mere impossibilities, remembering the instructive and beautiful saying which Shakespeare puts in the mouth of his hero Hamlet. There are more things, Horatio, in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy.
Yeah, so again, he's sort of glossing over many incidences that are detailed in the Puranic stories about how Sri Krishna has to overcome all of these evil influences and things sent by Kamsa. And again, this symbolizes the constant attempt of our egos to protect us from knowing our true nature, you could say. So it needed protecting, but the ego thinks it needs protecting. The ego needs protecting, you see. And so it has to dream up all sorts of ways of killing the inner joy and peace that's within all of us in order to keep the ego alive. The ego is something which is designed to keep the organism alive, and it is programmed to keep itself alive. And so this is our problem, is how do you solve the problem of the ego? So let's see what other adventures he's going to detail for us here.
I do not advise any man to believe anything blindly, but what I want to say is that it is always better to reserve judgment as long as one cannot properly convince others, as well as himself, as to the real state of affairs that took place in those Puranical days, the only means of knowing which are from these Puranas. Science has proved many impossible things to be possible. And is it a wonder then that what we cannot understand now and deem altogether impossible may appear to us clear as daylight in some near or remote future? So let us narrate the incidents of the life of Sri Krishna just as we find them depicted in the glowing pages of Srimad Bhagavatam and other Puranas, and try to understand them in our modern light as much as we can. That will be doing justice to our ancient holy sages, to whom many profound Occidental savants give due respect and honor nowadays, unlike our remarkably shallow critics, who never scruple to send them down to the lowest level of hemp smokers, and thus illustrate the proverb, "Fools trample where angels fear to death."
So he's trying to convince his audience to not dismiss all of these marvelous stories. And again, I think you can look at these stories many ways, and you can take them as actual, you can take them as miraculous, you can take them as metaphorical and mythological, illustrating divine principles. And so it doesn't really matter, because the importance of them is the spiritual importance to us, and what they mean to us is a spiritual aspirants. And in either case, they speak to us in the same way. They're giving us spiritual instructions. All right, so we'll continue here and see what comes next.
When we ponder upon the supernatural birth of Sri Krishna, when we consider the tyranny which the good folks had to undergo from the hands of the wicked at that time, when we consider the series of those miraculous incidents that followed him at every step after his birth, when we consider the irreligious and immoral attitude of the generality of the people, and at the same time, when we look into the past history of the world and see that whenever tyranny, irreligion, or immorality was rife in any part of it, that could not last long, because the deliverer was sure to come to the rescue of the suffering millions. We cannot but conclude him to be a savior of the oppressed disputed by God to look after the welfare of his children, and because divine power was acting through him. Therefore, all his works were extraordinary, and as such, ordinary people in vain rush to understand them with their puny intellects. To understand a great man, we must ourselves be great. To reach a fruit on the highest branch of a tree, we must have to raise ourselves or something else to that level, if we want to get that fruit at all. If our critics want to understand Sri Krishna, let them at least imbibe a little bit of his infinite greatness. He is known as Rishikesha, or Lord of the senses. So let our critics raise themselves above their senses. Let them be proof against all sorts of temptations, and then they will be able to understand some of the extraordinary incidents in his life. Blinded by passions and desires, if a man attempts to know anything about the passionless doings of a saint's heart, it will be as fruitless as a blind man's attempts to know what takes place in the venom or inner sanctuary of Sri Parasthasati. Many demons were sent by Kamsa to make an end of our hero, but instead of being able to kill him, they themselves were put to death by him, although in stature and strength they appeared to be 1,000 times bigger and stronger than he.
So we get the feeling that Swami Ramakrishnananda is faced with the critics of Hinduism, probably many of the Christian missionaries trying to tell people that all of these stories are just sort of fantastic fables and the Bible is all historical. And of course we know that the Bible has also got all sorts of things that could be thought of equally as miraculous and mythological and difficult to believe, and there are many inconsistencies in it. So they really weren't arguing from a very sure standpoint. And as I mentioned at the beginning, all of that kind of argument really is not the point. The point is to get the teachings of the stories and not to try to argue how historically accurate they are. So what we find in these stories is an avatar who is acting the role of a hero and is overcoming all sorts of obstacles, which is what we have to do in the world. We have our demon, the ego, that we have to keep overcoming. And no matter what obstacles the ego throws in our path, we have to try to overcome them. And if we can connect to the inner peace and bliss that is our true birthright, it allows us to override all of the problems sent to us by the world in the form of things of the senses, of difficulties, of trials in the world. All of those things can be overcome when we can contemplate the true nature of our being within. And that, of course, is the whole point of the different yogas. And, of course, one of the main yogas is Bhakti Yoga, and the Vaishnava sect, that's one of the main characteristics as well. Now, you can also see that this is the divine play, which is very well illustrated by the fact that our hero is still a very young child. And so when you think of play, you think of what children do. Children play. But the whole world is the divine play. If you read the Chandi, we see it as the divine play of the Divine Mother. And now that we're reading the stories of Sri Krishna, we can see it as the divine play of the baby Krishna, or the young boy Krishna. And so all of his little antics of teasing the ladies of the village and stealing the butter and showing his infinite nature to his mother, who must have had quite a time raising him, are simply illustrating the facts that the avatar represents the infinite, undivided, unchanging principles in the universe, and that they keep giving us hints of that. And even so, just like his parents and the people of his villages where he was living just can't seem to quite fathom it. They just can't quite wrap their mind around it. They see all these miracles happening, and yet they seem to keep forgetting that this is a miraculous young child. Well, we will continue this next week when we read more episodes from the Pastoral Sri Krishna by Swami Ramakrishnananda. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om, peace, peace, peace.